case that was set down for 3 weeks originally has been dragged out for 7 months.
In what position did you hold the gun then?
It was still in front of me. I was still holding on the wall in the bathroom. My balance is worse on tiles. I was still leaning a bit against the wall.
I have to put this on record. You holding the gun in your one hand, in your right hand.
That's correct, my lady.
Your right hand is bent. It's not straight extended. Am I right?
That's correct, my lady.
It is bent. It is pointing towards the door, but your gun was in your left hand. In your right hand.
It was in my right hand. That's correct, my lady.
You did not extend your arm and aim.
No, I didn't aim at the door, my lady. Okay. I didn't extend my arm. I wasn't aiming at the door. I was trying to stay put till I could make sense of the situation. My eyes were going between the window and the door. The firearm was up, but I was not extending my arm and pointing the firearm out in front of me.
If I just listened to your answer now, I was staying put to try and what? To try and make sense of it.
That's correct, my lady.
And you weren't aiming.
I said I didn't have my arm stretched out in front of me.
Were you aiming, please, Mr.
Yes, I was aiming at the door. The firearm was pointed at the door, my lady.
There's a difference between pointed at. My hand is pointed at, but I aim at point A. There's a big difference, Mr. Pistorius, and I want you to deal with the difference. Did you aim at the door or point your gun at the door? It's important.
I pointed my gun at the door, my lady.
Okay, then my answer that I struggled to get from you is, did you aim at the door? No.
That's the way Mr. Nell put it to me is how I understood it, so that's right, my lady. I didn't aim at the door. Good. I pointed my firearm was pointed at the door.
Welcome back to episode 1, part 2 on the Interrogating Oscar documentary. Now we'll be interrogating other aspects beyond Oscar himself. We'll be looking at what happens in the courtroom and whether we feel that those processes are credible and in the interest of society, and whether they reflect what we may feel is the truth or the true nature of events, and whether there's true justice, whether we can all agree that actually happens. Are court cases about the law? Are they about justice? Are they about the interests of society? Or are they an arena for dirty tricks, schemes, loopholes, and legal shenanigans? I'm going to provide context in terms of a timeline of the court proceedings in terms of when the reenactment video occurred. Because what we want to do is test whether the release of the video might have been strategic. Was it strategic? Was it a trick? Was it just a kind of a random event? If one considers that, literally millions are on the line in terms of the defense side of things, can we really credibly imagine that certain events in a court case are random. I'm also going to be reading a press statement released by Oscar's defense team on the 6th of July 2014. But before we do, I'm going to take you and contextualize the whole case as quickly as I can. If we go to April the 8th, Oscar howls and retches in court while describing how he shot Reva. April the 14th, about a week later, fans stand outside of court with banners and messages of support. Pistorius set up social media pages expressing further support. The next day, a South African newspaper reports that Pistorius was seen partying and flirting with women in Johannesburg during his bail period. About a month later, May 12th, it suggested that Oscar be put under psychiatric observation after a defense expert, says that he has an anxiety disorder. So the trial is set back again. Now, bear in mind, Arnold Pistorius sort of complaining that the court case was intentionally dragged out. But it was their own defense expert saying that Oscar had some kind of anxiety disorder, and as a result, that the prosecution had him tested. And as we know, after a 6-week interruption on June 30, the psychologist concluded that he was not suffering from any kind of mental illness. So in other words, he was his intentionality could not be questioned. So then we get to July the 2nd, where a report is read out in court concluding that Pistorius is severely depressed and will have an increased suicide risk unless he gets mental health care. And that really brings us up to this period, the ballpark when the reenactment video is released. But there's something else we also need to look at, and it's actually the very last court day, which was on July the 3rd, which I believe was a Thursday or it could have been a Wednesday as well. I can check that, but basically the person on the stand was Professor Wayne Derman, and he was about as terrible as Dixon. I'm not quite sure where the defense got their expert witnesses, but they certainly didn't do. They didn't really do Oscar too many favors. So what I'm going to just touch on here quickly before we go into the reenactment video itself is we're just going to contextualize what was going on the last court date before the reenactment video was released. So for starters, we know that Derman is talking to Harry Nell about a fight or flight response. There is a lot of banter between the two, between Nell and Derman. Derman at times is sarcastic. There is quite a lot of antagonism basically between the two, and Derman's actually not seems not to be intimidated by Harry Nell, and as a result, there's quite a lot of sort of argy-bargy between the two. But the bottom line is what Derman is trying to do, and he seems to be hugely defensive. He's trying to show what Oscar is like when he's not on his prosthesis. He's trying to show a man who is very nervous, who's basically a different person when he's when he's not got his legs on. So that's really the context of that last day in court. At one point, the BBC's Andrew Harding describes the exchange between Nell and Durban as testy. He talks about them crossing intellectual swords over semantics. But the most compelling evidence happens right in the beginning of the day, very early in the morning, where Durban says Pistorius is vulnerable because his stumps make him unstable and is significantly smaller. To quote what Durban says, he says, Oscar is a different man without his prosthesis. And he goes on to basically present a scenario which shows a very different side to Oscar. Someone who's not this extremely able-bodied person, someone who instead is felt sorry for, and he talks about the social implications of disability, people staring at him. It's just a totally different version of how we know Oscar. And there are two interesting tweets, one by Natasha Tay saying, Durban insists no one can truly understand life with disability without a lived experience. It's very, very compelling. And then Aislinn Lang tweets, Durban says he wants to talk about Oscar Pistorius' reactions in light and dark. Says startle reflex is accentuated in the dark. There's also some discussion about Oscar's sort of hypersensitivity to sound, and then there's a moment where Kenny Aldridge cross-examines and says Gerrie Nel is seeking to create an atmosphere and taking rules and guidelines out of context. There's a sort of point where Aldridge says that Durban never claimed to be a psychologist, and as such, Nell's reference to guidelines are irrelevant. We also learn that from Durban that Oscar was previously victimized because of his disability. Once he was pushed down a hill, another time his bed was set on fire at school. There's even a bit of antagonism between Durban and the judge, where Durban says, I'm not understanding Mr. Nell's line of questioning, and Masipa says, well, I'm not sure that should be your concern. If you don't know the answer, say so. Nell calls Durban biased. There is just a lot of clashing going on back and forth. And so what we get from this July 3rd is quite a heated exchange from this expert witness, where the judge gets involved, where the Oscar's defense lawyers get involved, and where overall Gerrie Nel seems to get the upper hand. He seems to, Durban seems to look very defensive, and he's not, overall, he's not very convincing. The bottom line is, what's fascinating about all this is that we are talking about Oscar's stability on his stumps. We are talking about Oscar, a different Oscar to what we've seen, but it's all kind of hypothetical. We're getting the description from this expert, and Nell's basically making it not seem very convincing. And so with that in mind, we then get a reenactment which shows Oscar on his stumps, which shows his lack of stability, which shows him appearing vulnerable just a few days later, as though this was waiting in the wings, waiting for a green light. That's what it seems. So that's how it appears. And so let's just have a look at the carefully worded statement made in response to the airing of the footage. Footage that was apparently, showing Oscar reenacting the incident as it happens on the 14th of February 2013. What we want to know, though, before we read this statement, is was this an attempt to subvert justice? In other words, a trick or a ploy? I'm talking about the whole reenactment video overall. Was the whole thing an intentional attempt to subvert justice? Was it a genuine attempt to try and show Oscar, recreating what actually happened? If the purpose of the reenactment was to present a version of what happened, why didn't they use it in court? Why not use this reenactment to literally demonstrate what Oscar's talking about? Why not use it when Professor Durman was testifying on July the 3rd? Do the versions correspond? Oscar's testimony in court, does it correspond with their reenactment? That's another question we need to ask. And then there's another one. What would have happened if the prosecution, and this is the crucial question, what would have happened if the prosecution referred to any of the details in the reenactment video? What would have happened? And then the final question, I guess, is, if the reenactment video was used illegally, without the approval, without the permission, without the knowledge of the defense, why did they not act on behalf of their client? Why didn't, it's a year later, why didn't they sue Channel 7? And so, we've got to assume from all of this that the defense had no idea this Australian television channel had the footage in the first place. It basically was a surprise to them. That's what we're assuming. And now we need to test whether that's true. And so we go to the press statement issued by Brian Webber on the 6th of July 2014. Right, so I'm quoting from the media statement as follows. In October 2013, the defense team engaged the services of the Evidence Room, a US-based company specializing in forensic animation. The company was engaged to visually map the events on the night of the accident. As part of this process, certain video footage was filmed. The visual mapping was for trial preparation only and was not intended to be used for any other purpose. It has now emerged that an Australian broadcaster has obtained some of this footage from the evidence room and has gone to air with it. We wish to make it very clear that the material that has been aired was obtained illegally and in breach of the non-disclosure agreement with the evidence room. Its usage also constitutes a breach of privilege, as this material was produced for trial purposes on the instructions of a commissioner, and the ownership of the copyright vests in the commissioner. No permission for the disclosure thereof has been given. For the family, the airing of this footage constitutes a staggering breach of trust and an invasion of the family's privacy. It has come to our attention that Channel 7 purchased this footage unlawfully. In addition, during our engagement with Channel 7, we received an undertaking that they would not air any of the material before the end of the trial. Whilst we cannot imagine how any of the footage would not support Oscar's version, we will only be in a position to comment further once we have had the opportunity to study what has been aired. End quote. Now, what is very interesting when one analyzes the statement from the law firm that represented Oscar Ramsey Webber is the admission that the video was made for trial preparation only, and they say was not intended to be used for any other purpose. So you have this effort to create this reinforcing content, and then it's not used. At the same time, towards the end of their statement, they say, in quite sort of colorful language compared to the more formal writing that precedes it, they say, we cannot imagine how any of the footage would not support Oscar's version. And that seems like a little bit of a poison apple, because by saying we cannot imagine how any of the footage would not support Oscar's version, any any doubter or any critic would immediately start to wonder, does the footage support Oscar's version? And as we've seen, it doesn't. In two respects, especially the way that Oscar is holding the weapon in the reenactment and the way that he testified in court are contradictions, clearly. And then the other aspect, which is worth noting, is in the reenactment you see Oscar picking up his sister, which is Emma is basically modeling Reva in the reenactment. You see picking her up in the toilet and sort of carrying her out. And what's interesting is Emma's got her arms around Oscar's neck, and obviously Reva wouldn't have done that. Now to pick someone up off the floor, if you Oscar, if you don't have any feet, you don't have any lower legs, you are on your prosthesis. Presumably, you are also you've got socks underneath your prosthesis, and it's a tiled floor which is bloodied. What are your chances of being able to do that successfully? So. And beyond all of that, what we also see from the crime scene is that there are smear marks, and this seems to indicate that Oscar didn't pick Reva up, that he actually dragged her, out of the toilet. So while the statement says we cannot imagine how any of the footage would not support Oscar's version, well, I think other people could imagine. And so what's interesting here is the context of the incredible emotions that were going on, the incredible sort of sparring going on July 3rd, and then literally a day or two or three later, you have this gift made available, to the prosecution, showing that all these things that Nell is arguing, he's got some more ammunition. And but of course, if he chooses to refer to any of it, then you could literally have a mistrial. And so you've got to look at it from that perspective as well. Is the evidence by Derman isn't really helping Oscar's case a huge amount. Dixon hasn't been a great witness. There's also been the whole catastrophe of Oscar going to, for a psych evaluation. His case is not going very well, right? And at the same time, he's burning through cash. And so could this have been a strategy? Well, who would benefit? Who would benefit if the reenactment video is broadcast? And clearly, Oscar benefits, because if the prosecution referred to it, it's a mistrial and he's found innocent. It is excused on a technicality, put it that way. So I'm just going to refer to an article published on the same day, July 6th, at around about 9 p.m. Stephen Toussaint, an associate professor at the University of the Witwatersrand, talks about the origin of the footage. He says, if it was produced by the defense as part of the investigation and preparation for the trial, it's strictly privileged. It's confidential and it cannot be used. He goes on to say, whatever you tell your attorney is strictly confidential and privileged. If there's a breach of that, there can be a mistrial. If there's a failure of justice, that's the end of the trial. So you literally have a situation where the court is trying to protect Oscar's rights. We looking at a situation where Oscar's rights to a fair trial are being protected. And so even if his defense team intentionally leak a video or whatever, it's his confidentiality, it's his privileged information that's being breached. And it's no error of his, and as a result, his rights need to be protected. And so it's a very interesting situation. What's even more interesting is that Harry Nell doesn't mention it at all the next day. What I've personally found very interesting about this trial is the misconceptions of the media, who are at times naive, at other times very uninformed, where you hear the term trial by media, and there seems to be this idea that people may not speculate about a court case, people may not discuss a court case, that if you do, exactly this can happen, there can be a mistrial. But this only really refers to the participants within the trial paying attention to exactly this sort of situation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my credibility as a journalist, as someone who's studied the law, and we're going to contextualize the credibility of the law right now in South Africa in the next part.